Black Lives Matter movement is likely the largest social justice movement in the history of the United States. It's fair to say the movement has emerged around high-profile instances of police violence against unarmed black men. But the movement is a reaction to more than just police brutality. Hello, this is Manny, and today we'll be talking about the scientific research into racial inequality. Scientists have studied the ways that black people in the US face unique challenges across many domains in life. In this video, I'll describe this body of literature and hopefully give you a sense of the scope of racial inequality in the United States. It's important to point out that racial inequality is not about how black Americans are the only ones who deal with problems, or how every black person is worse off than every white person. While it is true that black Americans deal with unique difficulties with racism and racial discrimination, people from every racial group struggle with many of the same problems. To summarize the literature that I'm going to be discussing today, on average, black Americans as a group encounter significantly more difficulties than white Americans in these areas. In subsequent videos, I'll address the question of why is there racial inequality in the US? The purpose of this video is to understand what racial inequality is and how it manifests in the United States. We'll look at 5 general domains of life: healthcare, economics, education, policing, democratic influence. Of course, racial inequality can manifest elsewhere, but there's a lot of scientific research into racial inequality in these important domains, so I thought we should focus on these. Also, you'll notice the length of the video. This video is so long because it's meant to be a one-stop shop where you'll find a long-form review of over 70 citations worth of research on this topic. If you just want the facts and don't like long videos, visit my blog, which is located in the description of this video, and all the citations are there. Or see the short version of this video with only the summaries at the end of each section. There's one more important disclaimer to make about this video. I'll use a narrative premise to get across the information. This premise is based on a concept by John Rawls called the veil of ignorance. Rawls suggests that when trying to define a fair society, we should look at society from a place of ignorance, where we don't know where we'll be in that society and what degree of privilege we'll have. Will we be a man or a woman, black or white, rich or poor, in a city, suburb, or rural area? Well, in a fair society, any of those places would be a place you can thrive and enjoy life and not have to experience excessive misery. Rawls thought that from this perspective, people would be more inclined to see past their biases that come from living a fortunate life and be more open to making society a more fair place for everyone. There is some scientific research that this may indeed be true. I'll play off of this thought experiment, but I want to make something extremely clear. We're going to be discussing how things are for black and white Americans on average. Any specific black or white person will have unique life experiences that could be better or worse than the average. Please keep this distinction between individual and group on average experiences in mind. That all being said, there's a lot of ground to cover, so let's jump right in. Wake up. Hi, where am I? Oh, you're in Pre-Earth. It's just a little place where pre-living shades get to chat about their upcoming existence. Speaking of which, congratulations. For what? A couple of people on Earth just had unprotected sex, and soon you'll pop in, side of a uterus, and then pop out in 9 more months. Wow. Pretty cool, right? We'll just wait here and you'll be on your way, so... Wait, where exactly am I going? What's Smurf? Earth. You're headed to Earth. Okay, what's Earth? Oh, it's like this big old rock floating through space, and there are other people there, and there's like food and water and doggies. Weirdly, as you say these words, I just know what they mean. So there are other people who I can hang out with and do cool things with. Sounds like a good time. Well, it definitely might be. Wait, what do you mean? Look, I'll be straight with you. We just don't have much funding here due to budget cuts. I just can't tell you very much about where you're going to be born. You know, you're going to be born a human, and a very young human, in fact, which is nice, you know, long life and stuff. But beyond that, I just don't have more information for you. The only thing we know is you're going to be born in the US. And everything about you besides that is kind of uncertain. I still don't get it. What do you mean by it might be a good time? Well, in the US, it's kind of hit or miss whether you'll have a good time or not. I mean, to some extent, it's kind of like a lottery. Lotteries are fun. A lottery? Yeah, like for example, you might win the lottery and be born into a rich family and like live a life of luxury. You might lose the lottery and just be in like dire poverty and deal with horrible stuff too. So, yeah. So you're saying life will be great for some, right? And just a real struggle for others. Oh yeah, really hard, not great. Okay, well that doesn't sound like a very great place. I mean, how will I know if I'm gonna have a hard time or not? Like, why would it be set up this way? I don't know. Look, I only want to go if it's gonna be fair, you know? Like, is the world, or more specifically, is the US a fair place, and what's it like there? Look, I work here, so, obviously, I don't know what it's like there, but, I imagine it's kind of part of the fun, not knowing where you'll end up. And also, it's, like, definitely better than it used to be there. I mean, I guess. It seems like you're kind of excusing how shitty things are now. Well, and more importantly, like, you can't tell me about what life will be like. So again, I can't tell you exactly where you're going to end up, but I do have actually a ton of stats of what it's like depending on different demographic information. Demographic information? Yeah, like sex, gender, location, socioeconomic status, religious background, race. Whoa. That is a lot of new stuff. It's honestly overwhelming. Can we just start with one thing and maybe dive really deep into that and then worry about the other stuff later? Okay, let's start with your racial background. It's important in the US in particular. So for now, we'll just ignore the numerous other facets of life and just compare kind of the aggregate experiences of white and black US citizens. And of course, there's like a ton of variability in the kinds of lives that people live. So the basic facts I can share with you are kind of statistical facts. They'll tell you what it's like for each group in general. They won't do a great job of describing your specific situations because, again, funding, blah, blah, blah. We can't tell you much about you specifically. So I guess from that, you could try to decide if the system's fair. Okay, fine. Also, I don't want to edit a lot of dialogue. So if you could just hold your questions and comments until the end of each section, that'd be great. Across the US, about 3.8 million babies are born each year. About 2 million of those are non-Hispanic whites, and 580,000 of those are non-Hispanic blacks. It's here in the process of childbirth that we will encounter our first instance of racial disparities. Tragically, for every 1,000 white infants, 5 will die as a result of childbirth. Again, just pure tragedy for many helpless parents. Unfortunately, Black families in the US are twice as likely to endure this tragedy, because for every 1,000 Black infants, 11 will die in childbirth. The risk of death as a result of childbirth doesn't just affect the baby.
The United States is in the midst of a maternal health crisis. In fact, women in the US are more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than in any other developed country. For Black women, the reality is even more startling. Their death rate is 3 times higher than that of white women.
These statistics likely reflect differences in access to quality prenatal health care, implicit bias of medical professionals, access to quality food, and a variety of other causes. This is again tragic, but most women and babies survive pregnancy and then leave the hospital in health. From there, women and their children will encounter environmental hazards that will be worse or better depending on whether they are Black or white. For example, lead and cadmium are neurotoxins that can have many effects on the body, but can also influence cognition and lower IQ. Black women of reproductive age will have nearly 3 times the level of cadmium poisoning compared to their white counterparts. Black children also have lead poisoning that is 2 to 6 times higher than that of white children. This disparity in exposure to lead is likely linked to house quality disparity. Black families are statistically more likely to live in older, less expensive housing in lower income communities due to economic circumstances, governmental policies, and discrimination, which is a topic we'll explore later. These older homes tend to have more lead paint, and they tend to be closer to industrial or waste sites which have other pollutants like cadmium. Black people in the US also breathe 60% more air pollution from vehicles compared to white residents. This is probably related to urbanization and redlining of black communities into areas near highway systems. Beyond pollutants, racial minorities, not just black people mind you, but racial minorities generally, are 1.5 to 2 times more likely than whites to have most of the major chronic diseases like diabetes, asthma, and cancer. To add insult to injury, while 7.5% of white Americans lack health insurance, 11.5% of black Americans lack health insurance. So I guess it's not surprising that the death rate for black people is significantly higher than it is for white people. For every 100,000 black Americans, 876 died in 2015. In the same year, for every 100,000 white Americans, only 753 died. In other words, the black mortality rate is 16% higher than the white mortality rate. If we investigate this disparity at the intersection of race and age, the gap worsens. The gap in mortality is significantly higher for people under the age of 65, where the black mortality rate is 40% higher than the white mortality rate. All of these factors lead to a world where black life expectancy is 75.5 years, while it's 78.9 years for white Americans. For these reasons, experts estimate the cost of racial health disparities in the US account for over $1 trillion in direct and indirect costs in the years between 2003 and 2006. Okay, that sounds awful. Yeah, no, it definitely did. So, how the fork did this happen? Maybe it has to do with the economic stuff. What's the economic stuff? Well, in addition to black Americans dealing with health disparities, they also face disparities in basically like all domains of economics. So, in fact, I'll just show you. Man, where to start? Well, you need a job to make money, so let's start there. About 10% of working age white Americans are unemployed, compared to 15% of working age black Americans. Now, this is likely related to the health issues we've discussed already, as health insurance is often linked to employment. There's also good evidence that this is the result of hiring discrimination, a phenomenon I'll describe in a subsequent video. It's important to keep in mind that this 5% difference in unemployment represents millions of people who, by lottery of birth, are black in America and thus are not offered the same amount of jobs. Jobs provide people with a means to make money, to have housing, to have transportation, to provide for your family, to have healthcare. It's hard to overstate how important jobs are for people.
Pop quiz, hot shot.
What is the median annual income of white Americans compared to black Americans? Come up with a number for how much money a black household brings in 1 year, and a number for how much money a white household brings in the same year. Here we see the income disparity between various ethnic groups. I'll note that the Asian group is largely composed of relatively recent immigrant groups that are often more educated and wealthier than both white and black Americans. Hispanics also tend to be immigrants, but a significant minority of Hispanics arrive here either as refugees or undocumented citizens and thus are not selected to be more educated or wealthier. This is just to point out why the inevitable comparisons between black and Asian incomes that will no doubt be in the comments is inappropriate. The other thing I should note is that we're looking at median income, and median is not the same as mean or average income. You attain the average income for Americans by adding up everyone's income and then dividing by the number of people. Economists discuss median income rather than mean income because the mean is highly skewed by extremely wealthy people. To calculate a median income for everybody, you basically line everyone up by their income from lowest to highest, and then you select the number in the middle. But I digress. As you can see in this image, white median income is about 71K, and black median income is about 42K. White median income is nearly double that of black Americans. So were you close? Did you overestimate or did you underestimate the disparity? Leave a comment and tell me if you were close or not. Also, just tell me how you felt when you learned how far off you were from the reality. So what about wealth? First, let's distinguish income from wealth. Income is the money you earn from your job. For most of us, income is your paycheck. Wealth, on the other hand, is the money and assets you have. Your wealth, or more specifically your net worth, is your account balance, your home value, your stocks, your bonds, your retirement, and all of your other material assets minus your debts. The minus your debts part is important as well. A lot of people actually have negative wealth because their debts outweigh their assets. As someone who paid for a master's degree through student loans, I'm definitely in that category of people with negative wealth. Like economic inequality in general, the black-white income gap is smaller than the black-white wealth gap. Pop quiz hotshot. What is the median net worth of white Americans compared to black Americans? Come up with a number for the net worth of white households and a number for the net worth of black households. Black households have about 10% the median net worth of white households. This gap is enormous. Keep in mind that this is the median net worth, so it's not that there are a ton of millionaires and billionaires and they're jacking up the average and then you're comparing that. This is, if you line up all the white households in the US by net worth, the people in the middle will have close to $170,000 in wealth minus debts. Do the same with black households, and the families in the middle have 10% of that, about $17,000. Again, it's hard to overstate what this means in real terms. Net worth in many ways is a measure of one's economic stability. One's home, transportation, access to education, healthcare, clothes, food, let alone influencing the democratic process in ways that will benefit you. In the US, more than other places with strong social safety nets, having wealth is key to living the good life. Partly why I asked you to estimate the racial wealth gap is that psychologist Dr. Michael Krauss asked people this very same question and found that people severely underestimate the gap. Respondents in their research thought the wealth gap was about 80 percentage points smaller than it actually is. Racial inequality persists, as with so many social problems, in the shadow of ignorance. People don't know just how dire the situation really is. The wealth gap can be seen in an array of other financial assets. As I said, net worth is a calculation of all your assets minus your debts, and one kind of asset is stocks and bonds. So while 60% of white households have money in the stock market, only 36% of black households do. Similarly, black households have about half as much retirement wealth as white households. However, this gap would actually be much worse if not for Social Security. If we set aside the retirement funds that only exist due to Social Security, black households would have about 14% of the retirement funds that white households do. This really demonstrates the benefit of having governmental social safety net programs. If not for Social Security, racial inequality would likely be far worse. Another important asset for many Americans is one's home. Owning a home is a luxury enjoyed by 76% of white families, but only 46% of black families. This is partly due to the housing crisis that hit black families far worse than white families. All of this talk about wealth, incomes, and financial assets sometimes doesn't really get across the human cost here if you are an economist or a social scientist. See, social scientists see this, and they see an endless chain of cause and effect that precedes these disparities, and the parade of miseries that is perpetuated by these gaps. Owning a home helps people, especially minorities, build wealth. Having retirement money and money in the stock market provides a nest egg that can then help people navigate health crises, or family emergencies, or job losses, or other unforeseen disasters like a global pandemic. To the untrained eye, some might say, okay, black families have less money, but so what? Is that really that different? Let's take a little bit closer look. Let's talk about poverty in the US. It's arbitrarily defined and, the way we measure it needs to be overhauled, but for complicated reasons, it hasn't been. I might do a video strictly on poverty at some point, but for now, suffice to say it's a measure of social conditions that captures deep economic difficulty that radically shapes the kind of life one lives in the United States. 7% of white Americans live in poverty, while 19% of black Americans, nearly triple, live in poverty. It's actually worse for children. 11% of white American children live in poverty, while 32% of black American children live in poverty. Given the depth of economic destitution that poverty brings, it's no surprise that about 8% of white households have an inability to obtain adequate nutritious food, while 20% of black households have the same issues. Extreme forms of housing disparity also exist. Researchers look at something called extremely low income renters, which are households that rent a home while living below the poverty level. This designation applies to only 6% of white households, yet applies to 20% of black households. But in America, extremely low income renting isn't even the bottom. Despite making up only 13% of the population, black people make up 40% of the homeless population, while only 13% of whites are homeless. That depth that the bottom of the economic ladder sinks to is truly unfathomable to most of us. Many black people sleep on the streets of cities built by the enslaved labor of their ancestors, and they do so without healthcare to treat predictable and inevitable physical and mental consequences that emerge from a life of homelessness. They do so while most of their fellow countrymen live in incredible luxury. The luxury of the rich, and even us in the middle class, underlies a fundamental reality. We have the means and resources to create an abundant society for those who are struggling in particular, but we simply don't do it. Okay, yes, it looks bad. It's 100% bad. What? Okay, yes it is, but what? But that's not all. Oh, good. So it gets better. Like, maybe there are egalitarian institutions that are constantly pushing society in the right direction. Maybe there's this place you can go to learn new skills and gain an economic advantage. Maybe this place is super friendly to people of color. It's like a gateway to a better life. Oh, I really like the optimism you have in the face of all the horrible things I've told you so far. Yeah, Earth actually has a thing similar to what you're describing. They're called schools, where people can get an education, and through that education, they can improve their economic circumstances. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, it's so cool. What a relief. Yeah. Although...
We're seeing damage from the roof where it's raining and snowing right inside of the school. And it's created these large humps in the floor, literally, where students were in here playing 2 months ago with the warped floor.
Not be able to go to jail, and that's not right.
It's not right. How does that make you feel?
Sad.
And now they hate gym because they can't come in here and use any of the equipment. All they're limited to is walking the halls. Okay, this is our band room. Our band teacher was laid off about 2 years ago, and our room has been empty ever since. Our instruments are locked away and uniforms just hanging. A performing arts program with no performing arts teachers is an oxymoron. I don't know why when things go away within this district that they're not replaced. And it's just getting sad.
Bring the easel up. Normally we have our reading lesson in the back, but because they did that $2 shoddy cover up on that pipe, I'm still scared to go back there. And I teach first grade, and I don't have reading books.
Now they don't bring books home, and everything is Xerox copy. They're little kids, they don't take great notes, so without books, it's a problem for the parents to help.
Now, we don't have time to get into the history of educational institutions in the US and the intricate reasons for the educational reality, but it's just a truism. Not all schools are created equally. Some schools have a ton of resources: quality, well-paid teachers, extracurricular activities, coursework that preps students for college, and droves of paid employees whose entire job it is to all but guarantee college acceptance and success. Unfortunately, Black kids are often born into circumstances without access to these types of educational institutions. In fall of 2017, there were roughly 24 million white and 8 million Black kindergartner through 12th grade students, or K through 12, public school students in the US. We can extrapolate that these numbers are relatively similar to the numbers in 2016. In 2016, there's data on just how many black and white students attended low-income schools, schools that are termed Title I schools. Using this data, I was able to do a rough calculation of what percentage of black and white students attend low-income schools. Pop quiz, hotshot. What percentage of black and white students attend low-income Title I schools? Got your guesses? I'll wait. Locked in your answers? So roughly 64% of black students attend low-income schools compared to 33% of white students. Meaning if you're black, you're more likely to attend a low-income school than not, and you're also twice as likely than a white student to attend a low-income school. Statistics about the raw deal that kids get make it very clear that there's something wrong here. Kids don't choose to attend a school with very little resources. They're born into it. There isn't a real meritocracy here when you are far more likely to be born into a community that simply won't be able to provide the quality education that other kids in the country are getting. Schools aren't just places to learn about math, science, and reading. They're places of social learning or socialization.
In September of 2019, a 6-year-old student named Kaya was sitting in her school's office.
Okay, she's gonna have to come with us now.
That's a police officer. This video comes from his body camera. At first, it seems like Kaya doesn't know what's happening.
Where are those for? No, I want to come Holy! Oh, I was in school. I just saw you.
Earlier that day, Kaya had a tantrum. 3 school employees said that she had kicked them. The school called the police, who arrested Kaya on charges of misdemeanor battery.
I don't want to go to the police car.
The police dropped the charges after Kaya's grandmother sent this video to the Orlando Sentinel.
One thing that black students learn is that they are seemingly punished far more than their white classmates. Black students are severely overrepresented in terms of how schools dole out disciplinary action. And this disparity persists even when you statistically control for the types of disciplinary action, the level of poverty at the school, or the type of school that we're looking at. A 2016 experimental study found that teachers likely engage in excessive monitoring of black students. Here's a short clip describing the study.
The researchers recruited about 135 preschool teachers. They had them watch video footage of 4 kids playing: a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And they told the teachers, their subjects, watch the video, there may be some challenging behaviors. As soon as you see something that could become challenging, hit the enter key on your keypad. Well, here's the trick. There was no challenging behavior. The researchers were using eye scan technology to see which child the teachers were looking at the most. And what they found is that the teachers, both white and black alike, spent the most time watching the black boy.
The study then goes on to show that there's an empathy gap between teachers of color and white teachers.
The teachers were also given a 1-paragraph description to read of a hypothetical child with a stereotypical name who behaves pretty badly in class, pushes, scratches, throws toys. And some of the teachers were also given some biographical information that helped make sense of that behavior. They were told that the child lives with his mother, father has been in and out for years, they're relatively poor, the mother is depressed, works 3 jobs. The researchers wanted to know if knowing this information made the teachers more empathetic to the kid. Well, here's the shock. It did, but only if the teacher and the child were of the same race.
The takeaway here is that demographics of the teachers and administrations at schools can have consequences in how students are treated. This is something we should think about, given that only 6% of K-12 educators are black. These challenges at the K-12 level will help us understand the disparities that persist into the college experience of students. Let's start with getting into college. 42% of white Americans aged 18 through 24 enrolled in college in 2018. For black Americans, it's in the same age group, only 37% enrolled in college. Black underrepresentation only gets worse at elite institutions. Part of the reason for the underrepresentation is that black students have trouble breaking into more elite spaces, even if they are equally qualified to white students. For example, let's talk about high-achieving students with high school grade point averages of 3.5 or higher. This is A students, basically. As an aside, I am not one of these students. Of these high-achieving students, 22% of those that are white attend community college, while 30% of those that are black attend community college. There's nothing wrong, obviously, with going to community college, of course, but if you're a high-achieving student, you would likely excel at and benefit from a 4-year university. But if you're black, you're less likely to get to a 4-year university, and thus less likely to gain from these benefits. Black students are more likely to accumulate debt to attend college. 72% of black students take on debt to get a college education, while only 56% of white students do. This is in part due to a concerted effort from for-profit colleges to target black community members. But their targeting works partly because many students of color do not have the kind of higher education guidance that their white counterparts do. For example, only 28% of white students are first-generation students, meaning that they do not have a parent that attended or graduated college before them. On the other hand, 42% of black students are first-gen. Having a family member who successfully navigated the college environment provides a host of advantages, like a perception of belongingness, access to institutional knowledge, such as like how to submit a FAFSA or other paperwork, applying for funding opportunities, emailing professors and how to sound collegiate, and jumping through the many administrative hoops on the way to attaining a graduate or undergraduate degree. Unfortunately, many black students, again, do not receive these benefits through no fault of their own. Another aspect of the college experience that can result in BIPOC scholars not feeling like they belong is the lack of interaction with faculty of color. Only 5% of the nation's collegiate faculty, that is, professors, associate professors, assistant professors, instructors, just any kind of faculty, are black. It's hard to see yourself as the first college graduate in your family when more often than not, you simply just do not encounter highly educated people who look like you and come from your community. I'll be doing a video on racial inequality specifically in the college environment, but let's just leave it there for now. For these reasons and more, in 2017, while 42% of whites 25 to 29 in the US have bachelor's degrees, only 23% of black Americans do. Despite the enormous potential for education to operate as this great meritocratic equalizer in the US, as we can see, the disadvantages are built in. Yet, in some ways, college really is that great equalizer. My dad was a first-generation college graduate, and by getting a computer science degree, he was a computer scientist at NASA when he started picking vegetables in the fields as a child. College can be transformative. It can open many doors in nearly any scientific field. But in myriad ways, the education system acts as yet another mechanism by which the status quo is preserved. If you don't feel quite convinced of that point, I hope you stick around. If you subscribe, keep watching. As I said, I'll eventually return to the topic of racial inequality in the academy, and you might find the research on this topic to be eye-opening. Okay, at this point, it's not even surprising. Yeah, no, it really isn't. And now that I look at all these stats again, it really seems like some really terrible shirt is going down in old US of A. You would think they'd do something about all of this. Yeah, you would expect them to do something about it. That would make sense. It should just be so obvious to people in the US that black people are being unfairly treated. You know, there should be a group of people who specifically make the world a more just place. No, seriously, hear me out. What about a justice system? You've mentioned a government. There should be a group of people who kind of police the society and make sure that this kind of injustice doesn't occur. Well, wait, don't tell me. Have I pitched another idea for an institution that ironically has had the opposite effect? I mean, yeah, fork. The movement for Black Lives has galvanized a generation of young activists. As a result, people of every age across every city and town in the US and across the world are thinking about race, racism, and racial inequality. However, many black people, and certainly many activists going back to the civil rights era and before, have always been thinking about these topics. As I said before, BLM, or more broadly, the movement for Black Lives, has concerns beyond policing. But it is undoubtedly true that the harrowing videos of unarmed black men and boys being killed by police has drawn the attention of the masses in a way that none of the research and statistics that I've shared with you ever could. Police killings of unarmed black people are incredibly sad. There are really no facts to bring to the matter beyond a person being killed by a civil servant. The officer involved acted as judge, jury, and executioner. The person killed may not be innocent of any and all crimes, but the question is, do they deserve to be executed without their day in court? In many of these cases, death was the punishment for crimes far more innocent than anything we would ever give the death penalty for. In terms of the science here, the topic is complicated. The national police apparatus largely does not track the statistics that would help us evaluate racial bias in policing. There's very little oversight on police. The data on shootings, arrests, and treatment by police is just not often documented in a standardized way across every department in the United States, and thus, scientists often do not have the data needed to ask pertinent questions. Beyond these logistical issues, police have been found to either lie about events or manipulate crime data. For all of these reasons and more, policing is just hard to understand from a totally objective standpoint. The complexity here is especially true with respect to police shootings. Now, we do have the simple data point that black people are disproportionately killed by police. This is just undeniably the case. As with all the rest of the statistics we have discussed, if you're a black man, you're more likely to be shot and killed by police compared to if you're a white man. Again, this is a statistical reality. This remains true even if we're looking at people who are unarmed or non-violent when they are killed by police. But as I said, the issue is complicated. One wrinkle here is that scientists have considered the possibility that police have disproportionately killed black men because black men, as a group, disproportionately get involved with violent crime. We'll return to this point, but I should say that this hypothesis doesn't just emerge from your racist uncle. Social scientists understand the pressure cooker nature of criminal behavior. Look in any environment full of adversity and marginalization, with little by way of social support and economic resources, and you find the environmental conditions that will increase the chances of violence and criminal behavior. So, scientists have tried to use statistics to see if racial disparities in crime account for racial disparities in shootings, police shootings. Some scientists have found that racial disparities in crime don't account for the disproportionate number of shootings. Other scientists have found the opposite. From my read of the literature, this remains a question that researchers still need to answer. Thus, when someone makes this argument, it's important to understand their intentions. They might be trying to just blame black people for being disproportionately shot by police, in which case this argument functions as a racism. Alternatively, they may be trying to say, the problem is bigger than just disproportionate shootings. We need to work towards improving the lives of black people in high crime areas, not just focus on less police shootings. In which case, yeah, 100%. Generally, scientists who think criminality explains disproportionate shootings are in this second camp. Your racist uncle is misusing the Fryer study, is what I'm trying to say. And this isn't even the only way to think about police shootings. One study has found that 1 in 1,000 black people will be shot by police in their lifetime. This is a rate that's 2.5 times higher than it is for white men. When you view the problem from this way, from the perspective of a person and their lifetime and possibility of getting shot by police, the problem is starkly clear. But if we expand our view of racial inequality in policing beyond the lethal shot of a police officer, we needn't look far to find damning problems. Let's just take a look at use of force more generally. One study found that the Minneapolis, Minnesota police use force against black people at a rate 7 times that of force used against white people. 7 times more likely to have your physical autonomy violated at the hands of a police officer. After poring over data from 20 million traffic stops in North Carolina, researchers found that black drivers are 95% more likely to be stopped after controlling for the amount of driving, and when stopped are 115% more likely to be searched. This disparity in searches exists even when controlling for the rate of carrying contraband. This is reminiscent of the way that black students are first excessively monitored and then disproportionately disciplined in the school setting. Sure, you're more likely to find more wrongdoing in a group you hold to a higher, more heavily surveilled and scrutinized standard. And this is partly why research has found that while Black and white Americans have been found to sell and use drugs at similar rates, Black Americans are nearly 3 times more likely to be arrested on drug-related offenses. Furthermore, communities of color are more likely to be subjected to the growing militarization of police. Black people are disproportionately likely to be targeted by SWAT teams. So far, the disparities we've discussed influence who police pay attention to, who they arrest, and how they treat those they arrest. But racial inequality pervades far more of the criminal justice system. One Department of Justice report in 2010 focused on racial disparities in prosecution and sentencing, and found that compared to white defendants, Black defendants were more likely to be detained before trial, even after controlling for charge seriousness and prior record, even for misdemeanors, more likely to have the case dismissed, a sign of overcharging, more likely to receive custodial offers over non-custodial offers, basically prison time over community service, and more likely to be sentenced more harshly after controlling for a range of factors that might explain that other than race. Similarly, another group of researchers found that defendants were 17 times more likely to receive the death penalty when they were convicted of killing a white victim than when convicted of killing a Black victim. It's almost as if the justice system values the lives of white victims more than the lives of Black victims. Another study in 1998 found that Black defendants were 5% more likely to receive the death sentence even when controlling for culpability. A 2011 study found that Black defendants were held at higher bail even after controlling for failure to appear in court. Some portion of disparities in sentencing are actually due to wrongful convictions. That is, being convicted of a crime that you actually didn't commit.
An Ohio man has been freed from prison after spending 39 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Ricky Jackson, a 59-year-old African-American man, had been jailed since 1975 on a murder conviction. The prosecution's case was based on the testimony of a 13-year-old witness. After a 2011 investigation, the witness recanted his testimony, saying he had implicated Jackson and 2 others under police coercion. The witness, Eddie Vernon, said police had fed him the story and threatened him with the arrest of his parents if he didn't cooperate.
This is just one case. To understand the issue more broadly, let's look at a study using the National Registry of Exonerations. Innocent Black people are 7 times more likely to be convicted of murder than innocent white people. Black prisoners convicted of murder are 50% more likely to be innocent than other convicted murderers. Black imprisoned murderers are more likely to be innocent if convicted of killing white victims. Wrongful murder convictions of Black people were also more likely to be due to police misconduct compared to when white people were wrongfully convicted. Black exonerees spent on average 3 more years in prison compared to white exonerees. Many of these findings call into question the idea that Black people commit more murders than white people. Black people are certainly detained, convicted, and sentenced more, but they are also far more likely to be innocent of those charges. As I said before, there are plenty of legitimate sociological reasons why violent crime would actually be higher in high adversity Black communities, but part of the story of racial disparities in crime is actually a result of injustice in the criminal justice system. Several more studies have shown that there are racial disparities in how people are treated when they get to prison. A 2014 study found that Black probationers have higher odds of having their probation revoked compared to white probationers, even after controlling for a variety of other factors that could explain this. A 2016 report found that Black prisoners are more likely to be subject to solitary confinement, which I suppose I should just note that, quite controversially, I don't think solitary confinement should be used. It's a barbaric practice and should be outlawed anyway. We've looked at a lot of statistics about racial inequality. We saw racial disparities in health, economics, and education. This is what racial inequality looks like in the US. It isn't just in one area of life. It pervades the American experience for Black people. And in some ways, the racial disparity we see in policing are the end result of the other forms of racial inequality stacking on to one another. The massive scale of our prison system reflects the lacking social safety net. In his book Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst, Dr. Robert Sapolsky describes criminality and violence as the end result of a long chain of events that starts long before criminal and violent acts are committed. This chain of events is hard to see, it's hard to study, and it's even harder to keep in your mind when you become witness to some heinous act that's been committed. but it is always there as a reason for behavior. Knowing that poverty, inequality, and a sparse social support system reliably results in an expanding criminal justice system should inspire all of us to address these fundamental problems in society before we continually put people in prison. Then, on top of all that, above and beyond these circumstances, there are all the police biases throughout the system that we've talked about up to this point. Given all this, it's no wonder that Black people are overrepresented in the prison system. Only 0.3% of white Americans are incarcerated, but 1.7% of Black Americans are incarcerated. This system, whether intentional or not, acts to facilitate and maintain racial inequality. Given that people have trouble keeping a job, a home, and a family together when they face incarceration time, this is a problem that feeds down into all the other forms of racial inequality that we see. Let's get back to our narrative device. Okay, I think I understand now. Meaning, well, the situation is clearly not fair. Why should lottery of birth determine whether I will encounter more difficulties based on my skin color? Clearly, the situation is broken. So, you decided to stay? No, actually, I decided to go. Wait, really? Yeah, no matter what my skin color will be, I decided to go and fight for equality. How do you mean? Well, I was looking through more of your statistics. Hey, that's mine! And found a bit more information. Yeah, what's that? I found that Black people are underrepresented at basically all levels of government. For example, 5% of the nation's sheriffs are Black, 9% of state legislators are Black, and there's only ever been 4 Black governors in the history of the United States, and there's none right now. Black voters are also more likely to encounter difficulties when participating in the democratic process. Residents of Black neighborhoods wait far longer to vote compared to residents of white neighborhoods. Black voters are more likely to have their ballots rejected, and minority-serving communities tend to have less polling machines. All of this keeps democracy from reacting to the needs of Black people, and as I see it, regardless of the skin color I'm born with, I have one important goal. Yeah? What's that? Do something to fix all this. Hey, thanks for watching my first video. It was a pretty long one, but I wanted to really dig deep and give you a bunch of resources on this topic and hopefully set the groundwork for future videos about racial inequality. I'd like to add in one more positive note for you to think about. So while I was outlining the difficulties and struggles of African Americans in the US, this has been met with strength and resilience in the Black community. UNC Greensboro professor and researcher Dr. Stephanie Coard did a lecture on this topic, and you can find that on the Brown University YouTube channel. I've left a link to that talk in the description. You've already done me a great honor by clicking the video, and doubly so by joining me here at the end. But if you're feeling particularly generous or feel you've gained something from this video, please hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell, or leave a comment to give me some feedback. Any of that activity around the video tricks the algorithm into thinking I'm a creator worth serving up to the next person. You can also contact me on Twitter if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on other topics or send me corrections about this episode. Also, I'd like to just give a shout out to a couple other creators who have touched on some of this content. If you watch this video, you'd probably like their videos, so go check them out. One is Nurse Liz, has a video about racial inequality in healthcare. T1J did a great video about racial bias in policing that is really great. The policing section has some significant overlap with what I talked about in this video. Hank Green over at the SciShow Psych has a bunch of content about psychophysiological consequences of racism, and I cannot recommend this enough. But yeah, thanks again, and see you next time.